So, what if I told you that a lot of companies, maybe even most, have a huge blind spot when it comes to their own culture? Today, we're going to pull that idea apart, and I think you'll see it's way more complex and way more interesting than we usually give it credit for. We've all seen this, right? It's on a poster in the break room or on the first page of the annual report. Our people are our greatest asset. And yeah, it sounds great, but what are we really saying? Because as soon as you say that, you have to ask the next question. Okay, if people are the asset, what's the environment we put them in? What is the actual culture they have to navigate every single day? And that's exactly where the confusion starts. We talk about company culture like it's this one, single, simple thing. But the reality? Oh, it's so much more complicated than that. So how do we even begin to untangle this? Well, we can start by looking at a really fascinating paradox: how different parts of a company can be driven by the exact same things, but end up in completely different places. All right, let's look at an example. Here's a pretty standard model for what we call safety culture. You can see it's influenced by about 10 key factors. Things like management commitment, good training, teamwork, all the stuff you'd expect to see to help prevent accidents. Okay, got that picture in your head? Remember those 10 factors, because we're going to make one tiny change, and you'll see how everything flips. So on the left, there's our safety culture model again, and on the right, security culture. Now look closely, really look. The 10 factors around the outside, they are identical, 100% the same. The only thing we've changed is the single word in the middle. And as the analysis points out, with this one simple substitution, it becomes obvious just how distinctly different safety and security culture become. This is the absolute key. You're using the same ingredients, right? But you're aiming for fundamentally different goals. A safety culture is all about preventing accidents, things that happen unintentionally. But a security culture? That's about preventing malicious acts, things people do on purpose to cause harm. Same factors, totally different worlds. And believe it or not, we're just scratching the surface here. It gets even more complex. Because we can use this exact same framework for risk culture, which is all about how we handle uncertainty, and for resilience culture, which is about how well we bounce back when things go wrong. Again, you can see it's the same structure, but the focus is completely different each time. Now here's where it gets really messy. These 4 things, safety, security, risk, and resilience, they don't just exist side by side in their own neat little boxes. No way. They're constantly interacting, bumping into each other, and even competing for the same resources and priorities. Just how complicated does it get? Well, it's not a simple case of addition. When you try to make all these factors work together, the complexity just explodes. It's an exponential leap. We're talking about a level of interaction that's something like 10 to the power of 10. Just a mind-boggling number of variables. So if you're trying to manage an organization, what does all this complexity lead to? Well, unfortunately, it leads to a couple of really common and pretty dangerous management traps. The first one is the silo trap. This is where you treat safety as its own little thing, totally separate from security or risk. The second is the catchall trap. This is where you just dump all of these different cultures onto one person or one department and pretend they're all the same job. Both are huge mistakes. And that silo trap is everywhere. For so many organizations, the cultural aspects associated with safety remain an outlier to security, risk, or resilience considerations. Basically, it gets pushed to the side as someone else's problem. Okay, so we've seen how complicated this is, and we've seen the traps people fall into. Let's pull this all together and figure out how we should be thinking about organizational culture. So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, first, culture isn't one thing. It's a mix of a bunch of different dimensions. Second, remember that safety, security, risk, and resilience all have their own unique goals. Third, they all interact in these incredibly complex, exponential ways. And finally, if you're in charge, you have to avoid those silo and catch-all traps. And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about for your own organization. Is your culture a deliberate, informed strategy that understands all these different pieces? Or is it just an ad hoc potion of random views and processes all mixed together? Honestly, the answer to that question changes everything.